Don't talk SRT about my whip. So, Dan Jenkins, WebRTC and real-time media geek. I've probably been in real-time media for about 10 years now. Dan_Jenkins on Twitter, not that anyone's there anymore, but it's the easiest handle to share. And you can find my other stuff there. And yes, founder of Everycast Labs. And I organize an event called ComCon, which I'll come on to later briefly. Everycast Labs, we've got a product called Broadcast Bridge, which simplifies bringing in remote participants into professional AV workflows, whatever that means. Come talk to me afterwards if you'd like to know more about it. Tonight, onto the real crux of the talk. Tonight, at London Video Technology. You've got to think about this as like, it's X Factor, okay? You have the head, have the voice in your head. The biggest contest of the year. The winner will win big. And the clicker's ruining this for me. Will be the undisputed UDP media transport ever. So yeah, introducing SRT versus WIP. So before I get on to SRT versus WIP, who here has heard about SRT? Almost the whole room. That's what I expect. How many here have heard about WIP? About half of the room. Great. This is going really well. This is what I expected. So SRT, what does SRT stand for? Secure, Reliable Transmission. I always love how the acronyms don't really do what they actually, what the crux is. So WIP, what does WIP stand for? Oh, it's clicker. WebRTC HTTP ingest protocol. I'm trying to get it renamed to ingress rather than ingest because it just makes more sense. So what is SRT? Everyone in the room, you're going to feel like you've got a boring lesson here because everyone knows what SRT is, right? But to be able to get onto the SRT versus WIP debacle, we have to do a history lesson, right? Yeah? No? Yeah? Bit of energy. Come on, people. So secure, reliable transmission. So this is what an SRT URL looks like, URI looks like. And you can add parameters to it to make it encrypted. You can add parameters to say whether or not, what kind of client it is and what kind of latency you want to kind of put into the thing. And it's pretty self-explanatory, right? SRT, and you want to connect to foo.bar on this port. And it just makes sense, right? You're sending media here, and it just magically kind of works. SRT is open source and was developed in the open, and then it changed licenses. I can't remember what the original license was, but it currently is Mozilla public license. And it was an IETF draft, which then expired. And I'm not really sure what the history is here. Maybe I can talk to someone here that knows more about it than I do. But the fact that it's an expired draft isn't necessarily a bad thing, which I'll come on to a little bit later. Uses UDP, not TCP, as all good media does. And it can be push or pull. So it can support encryption, but it isn't mandatory, which is really quite important when on other things later on. Apparently it defaults to 120 milliseconds worth of latency. Not that anyone I know of actually leaves it at that, which is quite interesting in itself. But the biggest thing for me is that you can control it very, very easily, right? And that's kind of one of the biggest superpowers of SRT. You can control how much latency you set, which means that you can then dial in how much time you've got to be able to fix problems. And then you can say, oh, I'm more than happy to have 2 seconds worth of latency and know that something good is going to come out of it. And yes, it's typically used by media, but the fact that a lot of people don't know is that it doesn't actually have to be used for media. It doesn't have to be used for video at all. You can actually send files using SRT, and it works brilliantly. It's actually a really, really great protocol for just sending stuff reliably over the internet, over the public internet. And ideally, it usually transports MPEG-TS with all of its subsequent bits. that we all kind of take for granted, which again is interesting in itself when we come on to WIP later on. But yes, like I said, it can be used for transferring almost anything reliably, which is a superpower in itself. And yes, it's widely supported, and this is one of the other superpowers, right? Like, it's in the very core of GStreamer and FFmpeg and VLC. It's in vMix and OBS and loads of other vision mixer type stuff. And almost every single platform supports it in some means, whether or not it's public or not, but most platforms do support ingress and egress using SRT, whether or not it's public or not. And Broadcast Bridge is one of them. The SRT Alliance is probably its biggest superpower of them all. There are now 600 members of the Alliance, which is really quite astounding when you think about how many companies and projects throughout the whole world rely, partially at least, on SRT and need it to continue to be what it is today. So a couple of names from the website. Cloudflare came on fairly recently, I think. Wowzer, Dolby came on extremely recently. Sony, Microsoft, Alibaba Cloud, Tencent Cloud, AJA, and the like. Eurovision. I wasn't expecting to find the EBU in the list, but they are on the list, which is really quite cool. And then very recently, I think like the 29th or something of April, I can't quite, 20-something of last month, YouTube announced that they were joining the SRT Alliance, which is huge, right? Like, we've been forced to send RTMP or whatever to YouTube for forever. And the fact that soon it looks like we'll be able to send SRT, which is great. And something I wasn't aware of until I started writing this talk is that their Plugfest is the 9th to 11th of May, i.e. starts today. And there was even a webinar at 4 p.m. Central European time, which you can probably go back and look at. And this is their Interop Plugfest, so that you can actually run a boatload of tests and know that you can talk to another provider that supports ingest or egress using SRT, because that's the magic, right? You can just, send something and it be accepted, and it just work. So that's quite cool that it's happening right now. So that was a bit of a boring history lesson for most of you in the room, right? Because you already know what SRT is because you use it a lot, et cetera, et cetera. But what is WIP? So it is the WebRTC HTTP ingest protocol. I really want to change it to ingress because its partner protocol is called egress. So ingest and egress don't make any sense to me. I want to change it. So looking back at the SRT URI, that was really, really simple, right? You were sending SRT to this place on this port, and then you could add a couple of things to tell it to do encryption, right? Whereas now with WIP, we've got an HTTP URI. That looks really, really quite similar to everything else, and that's because it is. Ultimately, it's a WebRTC signaling protocol. So before I go any further, who in the room has actually worked with WebRTC in the past, ever? Oh, I counted 4 hands. So that's quite interesting. Okay. So WebRTC has had this intrinsic issue since its birth, in that to be able to create a session, you needed some sort of session initiation protocol that you could go, oh, this is what I support, and the other end goes, oh, this is what I support, and you negotiate and go, okay, we both know how to talk Opus, or we both know how to talk AV1, right? And so you needed to be able to negotiate a session. But there was no standard for doing that. and it was by design. It was designed so that when Google wanted to go make something and when Microsoft wanted to go do something, they weren't forced to talk exactly the same thing, because ultimately one of them wanted to talk XML and one of them wanted to talk JSON, right? It's not quite as simple as that, but that's the crux of it. So WIP is meant to be that simple WebRTC ingress protocol that we've been missing for the past 11, 12, however many years old WebRTC now is. So it is an IETF draft, which is cool and nice because it means that we're actually going to get something standardized and agreed upon. But at the same time, is it a bad thing because it eventually slows down progress? It is TCP, but not UDP. Didn't I just say, 5 minutes ago that anything media is UDP? Well, that's true. But WIP isn't actually media. WIP is the thing that initiates the media. So WIP is TCP. And yeah, like I say, it has this partner protocol called WEP, the WebRTC HTTP egress protocol. So one is designed for sending up your media up to a server, and the other one is designed for being able to pull down that media in a unified way and be able to just say, right, I want to know about stream X, and you call and say, I want stream X, and it tells you exactly how to do it. So that's WEP. I really hate this clicker. So it's WIP and WEP are starting to really gain traction within the video space, whether or not it's real time or not. And we're seeing implementers and providers both starting to offer it before the IETF has even made it a standard. So Twitch have just implemented it. It's not quite public with Twitch, but you can go and use it today. Dolby were actually the kind of initiators of WIP because a company called Millercast actually made it, and then Dolby bought Millercast. So Dolby have kind of continued that on. So they're providers as such, and then we've got implementers and applications. So OBS, there's a pull request open on OBS to add WIP support into OBS, which is really, really quite powerful as well. Imagine being able to send a stream up from your OBS to Twitch, and you're doing really, really quick live streaming, and eventually Twitch will end up supporting WEP as well. And so the whole thing comes down to extreme low latency, whereas today, if you're gaming and streaming on Twitch, there's an inherent delay. And then GStreamer have added an actual module, an actual plugin for GStreamer using their Rust repo. So it's starting to get really great traction within the industry. My clicker has stopped working. Oh, there we go. But as I said earlier, it's TCP, right? It is just SDP over HTTP. Now, if only 3 of you put your hand up to know what WebRTC, what actually working with WebRTC, then very few of you are even going to know what SDP probably is. So it's a session description protocol, and it's exactly how you set up a call, set up a session with WebRTC. It's not just for WebRTC. It was stolen from like VoIP, and it's used in a couple of other places as well. But yeah, it's just a blob of text that is sent via a post request, and then you get back a response, and that's your answer. It's really, really, really simple. It's designed to be simple. But yeah, there's no media whatsoever, because WIP is just a signaling protocol. That's WebRTC's job. So very few of you have actually built something with WebRTC. So let's take a look at what WebRTC is very, very quickly. So it's a collection of protocols. So it was made up of like ICE, which ends up using stun and turn. The actual media is sent using RTP. the encryption is done via DTLS. So all of these things already existed. And WebRTC kind of just shuffles them all into one big, happy, semi-happy thing that you kind of corral to work together. So yes, it can transport data and media, but I wouldn't say it's quite as flexible as SRT is when it comes to doing this. And ultimately, it offers the lowest latency because it tries to do absolutely everything real time. There is no, there's little flags that you can play around with, and that's called play out delay. But ultimately, WebRTC wants to be real time, wants to go, here's media, I'm receiving it. I'm sending it, I'm receiving it, and we're 20 to 40 milliseconds apart from one another. Like, it's trying to do that all of the time. So the goal is always real time, whereas that goal isn't quite the same for, say, SRT. Media travels as encrypted RTP, like I said. So it's encrypted using DTLS, and then it's sent using RTP. And then ultimately, it's a peer-to-peer protocol. But the handy thing here is that a server can be a peer. So when WebRTC kind of launched into the ether 12 years ago, or whenever it was, everyone thought of it as this peer-to-peer thing, computer to computer. And those computers might be behind firewalls, right? And so you needed to bust through those firewalls and connect to the machines behind those firewalls directly. And that's peer-to-peer, right? But as things progressed and we needed SFUs and MCUs to be able to scale better instead of having these huge star mesh networks between these 5 machines all sending media to one another with never talking to a server. That still exists today, but the more common use case for WebRTC is now going through an SFU. So a server becomes a peer. But yeah, being peer-to-peer means handling NAT and NAT scenarios using ICE. So ICE is basically a process to bust through your firewall. You send stun requests up to a server, and it kind of makes holes in your firewall, and then returns to you and says, you can put media through this port because it's currently open. And that's how you manage to do peer-to-peer media. But yeah, that's less important when one of those peers is a server. Session setup using SDP strings. SDP is like this voodoo thing that you look at it and it doesn't make any sense until you start looking at it line by line. And you go, it's doing this, and it's doing this, and it's doing this. But ultimately, it's inherently very unfriendly to get started with. And the most recent SDP strings that can be sent to set up a WebRTC session can literally be hundreds of lines long just to set up a session. But it's got mandatory encryption because it wasn't designed for sending AV media from A to B. It was actually designed for conference calls where we really care about privacy, and so it's got mandatory encryption. You can't turn it off, and there's multiple codec choices, and this is all part of the offer answer that happens at the beginning of a call, and you can renegotiate during the middle of a call to say, I'm moving off of Wi-Fi over to 4G, 5G. And I've not got as much bandwidth as I had before, so can we go use this different codec instead? Or can we take our bit rate down or whatever? So you can renegotiate, and you can tell the encoders and decoders to change things during the middle of a call. This is WebRTC's biggest superpower. It works on every single device without having to install a thing. Because every single mobile phone in your pocket comes with a default browser, whether or not that's Safari, whether or not that's Samsung's crappy browser, whether or not that's Chrome on an Android device, or whatever. Every single phone, every single tablet, every single laptop, every single computer all come with a default browser. and that default browser supports WebRTC. You don't need to install a thing, and you can go to a URL, and you can join a session. That is WebRTC's biggest superpower. But it can work elsewhere too. This is a big thing. A lot of people think that WebRTC is a web thing, it's a browser thing. It doesn't have to be. It can work anywhere else. There are native SDKs, and you can go make a native app using it. You can put it into hardware encoders. You can do whatever you want with it. It's an incredibly flexible tool set that is becoming available to people that have never looked at it before. In short, it's designed to get media from A to B with as low latency as possible, and that's its goal. So, back to WIP versus SRT. I wouldn't say WIP is winning. Technically, there isn't a competition because ultimately, the real competition is between WebRTC and SRT. WIP is just kind of this thing that's enabling this change to happen. WebRTC is really coming from behind in your industry. Like, it is not used a lot for anything, whereas it's a really great tool for a lot of things. Why wasn't it used a lot for a lot of things? Because you couldn't interrupt between services. You couldn't know that you were going to be able to send a stream from A to B without doing a load of dev work to be able to incorporate into their SDK or whatever. Whereas WIP is changing that. WIP enables us to be able to have this standard, to be able to send a post request with a body with SDP in it that you might not understand, but you don't care. And then you get back an answer, you don't care what it has, you put it in both sides, and magically you've got this great stream between them that's low latency. But yeah, WIP opens open adoption, and WebRTC has never had that before. We've had lots and lots of common protocols for like creating VoIP calls using SIP, using WebRTC, but that's for phone calling. It's not for this. It's not for this industry. And for me, that's what's so exciting. It's opening up WebRTC development and interest to a whole new set of people who have never looked at it before because it didn't meet the requirements for inclusion. So YouTube supports WebRTC ingress today. You have to be in a browser with a webcam, and you have to press on a little button on the website, but you can send a stream straight up to YouTube using WebRTC from a browser today into YouTube. So we're not a million miles away from being able to send a very, very, very low latency stream from OBS, which supports WIP as a client, up to, say, YouTube as a server. I'd be surprised if that wasn't coming very, very, very soon, to be perfectly honest with you. Oh dear. Go back. Because I can't remember what that slide was. For me, there isn't a competition at all. And this has kind of been a big thing for me kind of coming into your side of the industry. I'm a real-time person, and this part of the industry is very, very foreign to me. But ultimately, you talk to people and they go, oh, well, we do real-time. I'm like, well, you're talking about real-time being, 3 or 4 or 5 seconds. And I'm talking about real-time being, 20 to 40 milliseconds, because you need 20 to 40 milliseconds to have a conversation with someone. So for me, it's not competition. It's about choice. It's using the right tool for the right job. And being able to do super, super, super low latency collaborations enables new things in ways that we weren't able to do it before. And being able to just say, open up a web browser and bring in someone remotely without them having to install Zoom or whatever they're using is hugely, hugely powerful. So it's down to which tool is right for your circumstances. Choose wisely. Both have pros and cons. You've got to work out what's right for you at that time. You can't be sad that you now have more options available to you. Whether or not you use them, doesn't matter. But more options for figuring out what's right for you in that circumstance is great. And it's the same when you want to receive a stream from someone. More options are great, because X doesn't always work and Y doesn't always work. So what do they both have in common? I mean, WebRTC and SRT both have the fact that, you know, they're UDP, and there are loads of other things in common. But what's the biggest thing for me when it comes to what they have in common today? Quick is the thing that potentially changes both of them in the very, very near future. And I think potentially changes them both for the better, but it will take time to do that. So exciting times in media delivery. It's really, for me, coming in to this part of the industry at this point in time is really, really, really exciting. So yeah, much love, not war. Thank you very much. And as I said at the very beginning, I run a conference called ComCon. It's around open media. It's a residential conference, and it's the 19th to the 23rd of June. And I'd love to see some of you there. There's a code there, LVT. You can get £300 off. It's one price because it's a residential conference. So if you want more details about ComCon, come talk to me afterwards. Thank you very much. As everyone, we're hiring. So thank you very much. I'm Dan_Jenkins on Twitter and Everycast Labs on Twitter. Thank you.